Hello, good morning, good day, good evening, good night. My name is Holly Gowan. I am the president of Edinburgh Studio Opera.
I'm Jen McGregor. I am the director of The Remarkable Rocket, ESO's current show, and I also wrote most of the lyrics, with the exception of some that were contributed by Grace Moran, who is also in the show in a brilliant little role.
Jen, it all sounds fascinating to me how on earth you managed to produce all these words that Oscar Wilde would genuinely be so impressed by. How did you manage it?
Necessity is how I manage anything. Obviously, when we were speaking over the summer about what ESO was going to do next, we were in lockdown at that point and nobody had any idea what was going to be happening in terms of COVID by this time this year. We still don't. But we, I remember we'd spoken about whether or not you were going to tackle an actual opera or what. And I suggested that Oscar Wilde had this short story that was quite fun and that we could fit some, I keep coming back to the phrase operatic bangers. I hope that's not too disrespectful, but that's very much how I categorise them in my head. From there, it was a question of finding pieces that suited the individuals who auditioned, and then it was over to me to find ways to make them fit lyrically for the characters that we'd assigned them to. And there was a lot of sitting down with the original pieces, listening to various different versions of them and going, okay, so what lies at the heart of this? Why did we think it goes here in the first place? And what can we do with this? And in some cases it was reasonably easy. And I went and did a lot of digging around about fireworks and what different kinds there are and what words rhyme with them, which is also super important. And then began the process of just sort of inserting these in. I'm a playwright and dramaturg when I'm not directing operas. So I've got a certain amount of experience of adapting other people's work or inserting things into other people's work that require me to keep a flavour of the original. And I've been mildly obsessed with Oscar Wilde since I was very, very, very young. So I feel like I've been preparing for this my entire career, really. It's been quite an intense process. There's been a lot of different lyrics needing fitted to a lot of different musical styles. Some of them easier than others, some of them easier to map English onto than others.
Yeah, obviously adapting this from an Oscar Wilde story rather than a set libretto presents itself with a lot of artistic liberty. I was wondering whether you ever get scared about straying too far from the story or straying too far from the music itself.
I try very hard not to let myself get in my head about it. Because I think particularly when it's the work of a writer that has always been one of your idols. A lot of my process was thinking, well, would Wilde be perturbed by that? No, probably not. And would he be pretty much cool with my doing this? I don't know. I like to think yes, but in the event that he's not, he's also been dead for quite a while, so he's going to have a hard time stopping me. If after this I end up getting haunted by the ghost of Oscar Wilde, then one, that'll be damn cool, but two, I'll apologise to him in person at that point and ask for his feedback because I'd appreciate it.
So, am I allowed to say that it's quite an eclectic collection of music, obviously? Has it been difficult? How much did you take into consideration fitting the music together, or is it purposefully very random?
We were led by the voices that came to us, basically. Our starting point wasn't so much how do we fit particular pieces into the story of The Remarkable Rocket. It was more a question of going, who have we got, who can sing what, and of those things, what might fit where? And does that all fit together as a coherent whole? And where it doesn't, can we style it out? So it is purposefully eclectic to some extent in that we didn't want it all to necessarily be of the same sort of the same era or movement or what have you, so that there are some sort of unpredictable leaps into different eras and styles. But we thought that those were the best way to showcase the singers that we had. And of course, we've been doing this at considerable speed. So if this had been a project that we developed slowly and carefully over a number of years, perhaps there would have been some different pieces selected. But given the sort of breakneck pace at which all of this has had to come together.
Without obviously letting too much slide, I really do like the collection of music. I think it sort of contrasts and complements itself very, very well. I think you've done a marvellous job in that. If you were given the option to have a composer come and do an entire score for The Remarkable Rocket, would you choose that over what we've already done?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one because I really, really like the version that we've got and the way that it plays with existing forms and styles. But there's also a part of me that thinks if I had the opportunity to work on a fully scored brand new libretto for an Oscar Wilde piece, that would be an absolute dream come true. But last year when I came to Edinburgh Studio Opera to direct Cavalleria Rusticana, that was ticking something off the bucket list. I had wanted to direct an opera for a long time, and you guys gave me my first chance to do so. I'd wanted to set operatic lyrics for a long time, and that's what this gave me the chance to do. I'm still working towards my first full-scale libretto. So if I could do that and have an existing composer, then yes, possibly.
Can we talk more in detail about your process? So you and Will Conway will obviously come up with a piece of music. Then what happens?
So the first thing that I do is look at the existing lyrics and try and get to know them as well as I can. Listen to multiple different versions so I can hear what kind of tempi people take it at, how different singers have interpreted it, and then try and get a really solid sense of where the syllables fit. Fortunately, everything that we've looked at for this has been in either French, German, or Italian, and I speak all three of those to some extent, so I can at least work through it myself and get a sense of where emphasis lies. Then I go through and do a sort of initial rough draft of what I think the piece probably feels like. I try and find my hook into it, and then write the lines that jump out at me first. So quite often there'll be sort of one particular phrase that I know where that fits, and I'll work back from there and try and find out how I get to that point. And then build and build from there. Doing this under time pressure is actually something I would really, really recommend because, again, I think if I'd had infinite time, if I'd had all the time I might have wanted, there are so many of them I could easily have never completed, because making things feel perfect and making them feel like they'll work, like they're fine, there's a big gap between those two. And there are some of the lines where I look at them and go, yes, absolutely. I know that I personally can't best myself on that line at this point. And there are some that are a little bit more like, someday I might come back to that and refine that just a little bit, tweak it just a tad, when we're not kind of going, right, it's going out on April 1st. Let's get on with this. So there is a gap. We knew that doing this all through technological means rather than through being in rooms together would increase the length of time that it took to do everything. Having to physically go through the process of opening a program and using said program to apply the new lyrics to the piece of music, finding the scores that would allow us to do so, or having to, in some cases, handwrite the new lyrics into the score, having to do this sort of back and forth with me of finding out where exactly specific syllables went. And that was kind of my testing stage as well, was working with the individual singers to see where they felt it fitted and whether they sort of got that intuitively or whether I needed to go through it with them. And I'm a very, very bad musician. Like I'm not very literate in terms of the dots and squiggles. So for some of the more complex stuff, actually fitting it to the score without the singer's input was something I felt very nervous about. So it was a big old process with a lot of back and forth, spaced out around people's schedules. So I think it's been a massive learning curve for everyone, all of this. And just the sheer number of people involved in something like this makes it time consuming. Not what you're doing with any one individual, but just, and obviously for the singers, they've then got to get used to this new process that's singing in English, singing something that they may well know in the original language, but not obviously with the new lyrics, having to figure out where that matches and where it doesn't, and where I'd got things wrong, because inevitably there would be places where what had made sense to me in my head didn't quite map onto what was there, and it just needed little tweaks, or occasionally just things like accent differences, just things like the fact that for me some words are a certain number of syllables, and for something with an accent from a different part of the UK, bit of that, and a huge amount of me having to, because again, normally I would work through all of this a lot more by myself before handing things over if I could, but because of the speed that we had to move at, it meant I had to just go right ahead and go, here you go. And the working out, the sort of redrafting process, we're going to do that right now together, and I'm going to have to share it with another human being and admit the imperfections. So that
I never realised it was quite so much of a nuanced process, and I never realised how much work goes into it before a singer actually sees a piece of music.
It's so much fun though. It really is. Like, I think this is the other reason why I always long for more time with things like this. Not just because in practical terms it would obviously be a relief, but also because it's a beautiful part of the process to be in, where you're in the midst of writing something and so many of the possibilities are still open. Like, writing is a big process of shutting possibilities down, which sounds counterintuitive because obviously it's a creative process, but as you're going from something existing as a potential thing in your head to an actual thing on the page, it goes through that journey where some options just stop existing, or they stop existing for this draft, at least for this version of this thing.
It's always the case. I know that it's not quite translation, but it's sort of similar to the process that I would use in translation as a language student, that there's never a perfect way of doing things. It's just your version, and that's the best that it can be. So
and sometimes you hit on something where you just go, oh, I like that. And other times you look at it and just go, it's accurate. Like, it's not art, but it's accurate. It'll do. Because I remember that. It's obviously been a while since I did formal study of languages, but yeah, I remember that feeling sometimes of just going, I love the way I translated that. I really do. That works. That actually is beautiful. And the times when it didn't. It's been really nice actually getting a chance to work with French and German again, because it's been a while. Like, Italian's probably the most active of my languages, because I a lot of the work that I do as a playwright is informed by Italian source material, and it's kind of the dominant language after English in my brain. And French, I mostly had to shut down to make room for Italian. So at this point in my life, my spoken French is basically Italian with a French accent. French, I always find a little bit tricky anyway with sung French, because it's got emphasized syllables that you wouldn't emphasize in spoken French. And so that already does a number on my brain. And then trying to factor into that, fitting it to the music and this particular narrative as well, it's a lot. It is. It's been a really good challenge to take on, though. And I think I would strongly recommend it. Like, anyone who enjoys writing, try some of this, because you learn such a lot from it as you go, and just about how rhythms work and what needs to go where. And I would say and why, but it's more intuitive than that. You don't really know the why a lot of the time. You just know that it works or it doesn't. And then you give it to a singer and they've got a completely different intuition about whether it works or it doesn't. Or conversely, you're listening to it and going, oh, that didn't quite work in my head, but you made it sound really good.
I didn't realise that we as singers had quite so much of an influence over the language and lyrics that you've chosen for us, but we're very grateful.
Oddly, you do. Like, so when I'm writing for actors, like, a lot of my starting points as a playwright have been specific actors. A lot of the time I will work with an actor on a project and find them interesting and kind of go, oh, you get a lot of roles like this, but not a lot of roles like that. And there are these qualities that I see in you and that I would really like to bring out and play with a little bit. And so I'll write something to do that. And this has been a little bit like that, knowing quite a few of you from last year and sort of having had a chance to see you in rehearsals and like actual in the flesh rehearsals, and on stage. When we came to do this, there was a little bit of that going on, and looking at what people chose for their audition pieces and things like that, that gave me an idea about not just where their voices sat, because I was very much taking Will's guidance on that, but how the songs they'd chosen sat with them, what that felt like, what the kind of qualities and character were that were coming through, and where we could go with that. So in some cases, that really informed my choices. I like that process a lot, of being able to get to know people in a different environment, move on to a second project and go, right, okay, so this is where I'm coming in with foreknowledge. This is where we can actually take things a bit further and go to interesting places in a way that isn't available to you the first time you work with someone. Going back to your question about if I could work with a composer to just do the whole thing, that would be really, really interesting from that point of view, of actually being able to look at individual singers and go, oh, but what could you do with them if you were actually writing for them? What do you do if you know their specific range and you know where you can push and pull and tweak and do character things? And again, someday when I actually do get to write a libretto, I hope I get to do so with specific artists in mind, because I'd really like to apply what I do with text-based theatre to opera at some point and see how differently it functions.
Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you for asking them, and generally thank you to ESO for taking a chance on someone who hadn't directed an opera before, for Cav, and then trusting my nonsense for the Rocket.
We knew that a Jen McGregor and Oscar Wilde collaboration was going to be something that we needed during a lockdown.
Well, I hope that it brightens people's day. I think that it will. Having seen what I've seen so far, I'm confident that it should put smiles on people's faces, which is what we intended all along and what I think we need very, very badly at this point. So, yeah, fingers crossed that it does. And preemptive thanks to everyone who's going to go buy their tickets and watch it.